Okay, well, look, what I thought I'd talk about is I've done a few courses. I've done transpersonal counselling course, I've done hypnosis course. I'm interested in cybernetics, control systems theory and so on, and modelling. And I just thought the mind is the most complex thing in the universe as far as we know. And so different people have developed different models of it. As one cyberneticist said, Norbert Weiner once said, the best model of a cat is another cat, or preferably the same cat. With models, they're all incomplete. We have an incredible amount of diversity in the diversity in the universe, and so every model we make of it is just a simple. Has to be much simpler, and it's also by definition it's got to be wrong. But some models are better for some purposes than others. So this is just looking at a ragbag of models, sort of like picking up paintbrushes and throwing paint at the screen to see, whether you're going to get Mona Lisa or the blue poles or something worse. But hopefully, you'll find some correspondences in here. I'll try and point out some of the correspondences, and also it can give you ideas for metaphors and so forth in your work. So anyway, there's models of the mind, and I'll start off. I've already talked about that. Very complex models of descriptions. Models, talk about systems. They focus on parts and dynamic relationships between parts. How parts interact. The mind's just more than a whole lot of bits. It's an interactive, dynamic thing. And all models are simplifications. And so look at models, see any correspondence, get ideas for therapy and so on. Metaphors. So if you go back to the Egyptians, they saw the person divided into physical and spiritual aspects, and you see this over and over and over again. So you've got the physical body, and then you have the spirit, you have the shadow, the personality or soul, the life force, and a name. They regarded names as very important. Then they considered the heart as the seat of the emotions. And their ultimate aim was to rejoin the car, the personality or life force, with the life force and living on. And apparently after death, the spiritual aspect needed the body to reconnect with, to act as a sort of a focus for them, or to connect with. So they obviously took a lot of pains to embalm themselves and so forth.
With the shadow you mentioned, would they see that in the Jungian sort of way, or was it something?
Good question. I don't know. They actually had some other things later on. I mean, the Egyptians were going for 2,000 years or whatever, and they kept on adding bits and pieces as they went. But you've got this idea, and once again, I'm not trying to say this is the mind, this is it, but they're just you have got, as early as the Egyptians, you've got this idea of the heart as the seat of the emotions, which we'll see recurs, and also the body and the spirit as being. Now the ancient Greeks. The mind was part of the soul. The soul was comprised of three parts. There was the nous, reasoning part, and that was seen as immortal. The thumos, the spirited or courageous part, located in the chest. Courage, and of course courage, from the French, le courage, coeur de lion, all that sort of stuff, based on the heart. And then you've got the epithumia, the appetite, and that's the midriff, the the appetites, eating, sex, whatever. But those two were mortal. The bodily parts were mortal, whereas the reasoning part was seen as immortal. And the human experience they saw involved a struggle between the higher and the lower parts of the soul, and you can see correspondences here with Christianity. Now the ancient Greeks, they had Mount Olympus, they had gods and goddesses, they had a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, and also demigods and demigoddesses, as the gods often mated with humans, and so you've got Ulysses and all those. The Romans, when you look at the Roman religion, I mean that they'd simply adopted the Greek religion. The Romans weren't very, I won't say they weren't bright, but they were more focused on military stuff and you know, I wanted, just keep it simple. But they just sort of took the Greek religion and renamed the deities. But of course there were a number of things going on in Rome, but anyway, but they had a wide range of deities that could be called upon to process unconscious contents arising from different situations. And so, I mean, here, this is the judgment of Paris. Paris is off to the left there. But there you have who's the Greek goddess of beauty?
Venus.
That's Roman Aphrodite, yes. You've got Aphrodite, sort of who represents beauty, connection. Then you've got Athena, who's the sort of father's daughter, sprung fully armoured from her father's head. That's Athena. And then you've got Juno, but she's Hera, the woman in relationship to the husband, the wife who derives power through her husband. So you've got these archetypes, and women who go through stages of life where they actually really need to activate these archetypes. You've also got Persephone, who's the young girl. You've got the Demeter, who's the mother, and women could identify with these deities, these subconscious patterns. That's Jungian, and I'll talk about that later. But anyway, that was the Greeks. The Jews, they originally had male and female gods, a god and a consort, female consort, but the female consort got relegated. Although the Jewish religion still has elements of that, in that the descent is through the mother rather than the father. But anyway, the Jewish god was Yahweh, and he was very primitive and unpredictable. And then the Jewish god transformed into Jehovah, where there was a covenant between God and his people. So the original Jewish God was like a tyrant sort of father who just sort of beat you up for no reason, and you just sort of hoped that you tried to do the right thing, whatever that was going to be, but anything could happen. But then was it Moses who brought up the 10 Commandments and came back, and then there was a contract. So they'd made a sort of a contract with their God, that if they behaved themselves and did these things, that he'd look after them. And that was there. But there's an emphasis on contract there, which is interesting.
Tim, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Sorry, this is going to take you off tack a little bit to what your brilliant talk is.
Anywhere's off tack.
Because there's that really Jewish thing about laws and the father is is that homicidal maniac, really, Jehovah.
Yahweh, I think which one?
Where do you think they came up with that guilt and shame, and you've got to, everything's got to be Because,
Yes.
the Egyptians and the Babylonians... Actually, can I tell a joke that illustrates this beautifully?
Good.
So, God goes hovering over the Babylonians, and he says, "I've got a commandment for you." And they said, "What is it?" And he said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." They said, "That's no good to us, adultery is what we do." So then God goes hovering over Egypt, and he meets the Pharaoh, and he says, "I've got a commandment for you." Pharaoh says, "What is it?" He says, "Thou shalt not steal." And the Pharaoh says, "Well, that's no good to us, looting and stealing, that's what we do." So then he finds this tribe wandering in the desert, and he says to the leader, "I've got a commandment for you." He said, "How much is it?" He said, "It's free." He said, "I'll take 10.
Remind me to tell you about the joke about the Hasidic Jew and the blonde in the hotel lobby.
Do.
Okay, it's not anti-Jewish, but okay. So, with the modern Christian spirit and the feminine, this is sort of Jungian stuff seeping through here. Spirit is the messenger between the soul and God. So you've got God and you've got the human soul, and the spirit is often represented by a dove, which is interesting. The symbol of the dove's the symbol of Aphrodite, which is interesting. So the spirit's actually seen as feminine. The Holy Spirit. They talk about the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. The Spirit is often regarded by a lot of people as feminine. Anyway, but the spirit is a more amorphous thing. The spirits can be represented by sort of light or dove. But Jesus is a combination of God and matter. That's one of the interesting things with the Christian religion is begotten, not made. You remember in the creed, begotten, not made. So Jesus was actually a combination of matter, of a person and God. So probably a demigod.
Yeah, that's his
technically.
Greek demigod status.
Yes. The soul is seen, and during the medieval sort of Christian, the soul is seen as prisoner of the body. And the souls of a higher nature, and prayers, fasting, celibacy and so on, were spiritual and superior, and the bodily functions such as work, eating and sex were of the flesh and inferior, if not sinful. And that's a problem. A lot of people have problems with that. There's one book by The Rainbow Machine, I don't know whether you've read that, where a woman wanted to see this therapist, sort of hypnotist, NLP practitioner, over what she called Roman Catholic guilt, and so he arranged a time to see her, and she walked into the office, and there he was dressed up as Mephistopheles, as the devil and horns and everything like that, to discuss her Roman Catholic guilt, which was cool. But so fixation on the celestial can cause psychological problems. Sublimation of the sexual libido can miscarry, such as pedophilia. I mean, we've got priests doing that, and only a small number, but Rupert Murdoch's been. Anyway, serious though. But attempts to limit diet or eat a purer diet can lead to dietary issues. And so I think that this is perhaps behind, not the only one, that this is behind, a lot of this is behind anorexia. So, and because people can feel ashamed about their bodies. Just one meaning of the cross symbolism for Christians. We live in the terrestrial, and this is a good thing to say. I mean, you don't want to. We live in the terrestrial. We want connection with the celestial and the infernal, but you can get too carried away with the celestial, and you can get too fixated on the infernal. The Egyptians did. The Egyptians were, they were just totally fixated on death. Everything was all about preparing for death, just about everything. and I mean, I think there's a saying, only the gods can live on Olympus, and I think that's a very good saying for somebody with anorexia. You know, only the gods can live on Olympus. You know, you're mortal. You need to eat food. You know, so anyway, the modern Christian, we've got a more limited range of archetypal symbols than the Greeks and the Romans. And one of the things I think with hypnosis is that a Jungian, with Jungian psychology is really fantastic, but it lacks hypnosis. You know, hypnosis just puts it into overdrive. You go into overdrive. But people need archetypes, and archetypes are seen as spiritual because they're sort of, they come out of the body, or you know, or the hypothalamus or somebody, if you want to get into the sort of meaty stuff, which I tend to avoid. But you've got the archetypes of God, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, the Virgin Mary, who's a very cut down feminine. The Virgin Mary is a male construct of what a woman should be, sort of dutiful, not making a nuisance, being there to mourn, delivering the child, the golden child, who just happens to be a boy, of course. Yeah, so you've got
and
this.
born out of her hip, because Jesus wasn't sullied by the birth canal.
Really?
He was born out of a hip like Buddha was.
Wow. Oh. And also born out of.
That's exactly right.
And born out of the thigh. Who was born out of the thigh? That was.
So Buddha's the same, is it?
One of the.
Yeah, born out of the.
So why would that develop? Why would Buddhism develop the same way as Christian?
Well, because if you're male, you've got to realise as well, according to the Christian Bible, you know, where it all kind of goes downhill from Genesis.
Yeah.
But God made Adam. God made women from Adam's rib, and therefore there's the implication that women are a subspecies to men.
Yeah.
So, and women are the vessel of the devil. You know, the whole Judeo-Christian thing is all about the suppression of the sacred feminine, which Tim so beautifully explores in your amazing Victorian talk. So we're the vessel of the devil. Plus, we would have been pretty weird, you know, bleeding but not dying, bleeding is normally associated with death. And whoever wrote Deuteronomy, who obviously wasn't Moses, because 4 times during Deuteronomy he declares his own death, so it obviously wasn't Moses. But it says, like, women are unclean, you know, during menstruation. And because we're so unclean, and that means ritually unholy, and you can't go to the temple, to make sure that you can't contaminate anything through bleeding and not dying, and all that curse thing, which is the curse because you're supposed to be pregnant.
Yeah.
So we're going to then make you unclean for another full 7 days. Now, if the Jews obeyed that, the women's most fertile time is between day 7 and day 12 of her period, because it takes 3 days for the sperm to reach the fallopian tube. So if they all women would have been pretty much menstruating 28-day cycle. They would have been getting so much lunar activity, they would have all bled at the new moon and ovulated at the full moon. So if the Jews actually obtained no sex for 14 days, there wouldn't have been, so whoever inspired Deuteronomy didn't understand, you know, God didn't understand women's reproductive science, because there wouldn't have been any Jews at all, because their fertile windows would have all been closed.
Yes, well, the children make their way.
So the Virgin Mary is a very interesting archetypal Virgin Mother Goddess.
Oh, absolutely, and very limited. I mean, with the Egyptians and the Greeks, I mean, they had, well, Isis.
Isis
very
gives birth
incredibly
to the sun.
powerful.
Isis gives birth to the sun every morning.
And Isis and Osiris and well, Isis, Osiris, Nephthys and Set, and the whole Isis myth is really interesting. But okay, moving on. So modern Christian, we've got the right is good. That's one of the things come out.
Yeah.
Right is good, left is evil. And apparently people who tend to hear voices in one ear is just about always in the left ear.
Mm.
Because of course it's subconscious, so left ear, right brain, left ear, the left side.
Wow.
So that's the, and of course you've got this idea of the Christian idea of the devil and the angel on each shoulder. So.
And that's probably reinforced by most people being right-handed.
Yeah. Oh yes, that's right. And why they tried to make people left-handed, people right.
Yeah, we all know that.
And the okay, like the Egyptians, the Christians believe the heart is the seat of the emotions, and that's often shown with thorns or dagger indicating compassion or loss. Modern day Christian is sort of really not much different. You've got the immortal soul, but the mind is mortal and the body is mortal. I think he must be a Southern Baptist, by the way.
It was like a very keen Southern
Yeah,
Baptist.
looks Southern Baptist. Okay, the Muslim soul consists of rational and non-rational parts. The ultimate end or happiness of the soul depends on its ability to separate itself from the demands of the body. Once again, you've got this same thing as the Greeks, this fight between the soul and the body, and to focus on grasping the eternal aspects of the universe. The Muslims spend a hell of a lot of time in trance. Prayer is a trance state, and the Muslims, these are the dedicated ones. They go into trance 6 times a day, which is a lot.
Well, they're supposed to.
They're supposed to, yes. Probably a lot do, but.
What's your thoughts behind that? Why do you think they're doing that?
Well, it's a good state. It's very affirmative. It grounds them to their unconscious and spiritually and so on. But at the same way, too much trance and they can end up, making car bombs and
But it's
flying
also
planes into
obedience.
buildings.
It's like the Jews.
Yeah.
Continual reminders to be obedient to whatever they say the rule is, at that time.
It's an interesting concept about trance, isn't it?
Oh yes. People say there isn't a religion now, but I think there is. It's computer games and movies
TV.
and Marvel
TV God.
and TV and phones. Yeah.
And McDonald's.
And
McDonald's.
maybe, but it's more going into trance, using this technology to go into trance and feeding complementary images and superheroes, all these superheroes, Superman, Spider-Man, you name it, Shovel Man or something, one of them, probably not. Anyway, going on to the Buddhist, the world is permanent, imbalanced and interlinked. Well, we knew that. But nirvana and enlightenment is attained by meditation, and attaining a state of nirvana releases one from the cycle of death and rebirth with their attendant suffering. Mm-hmm. Apparently the idea is to take the short path. If you're living in Tibet, or probably not now, but the idea is if you do enough meditation, so you can become a Buddha. And nirvana is not a state of nothingness. It's really a state of just being one with everything and sort of perhaps understanding it. The other thing is, of course, reincarnation, the concept that the non-physical essence of a living being begins a new life in a different physical form or body after biological death. And of course, this is life, death, rebirth. And there are some Christians who believe that too, some Christian churches. Hindu, old and diverse. The Hindus believe that all living creatures have a soul. The soul or true self of every living being is called the Atman. The soul is believed to be eternal. They believe in reincarnation. and ties in with past lives, as I mentioned, this ties in with past lives and life between lives. And the Hindu religion has a rich pantheon of gods, goddesses and demigoddesses, so there's always someone you can pray to, some god or goddess who fits the situation that you find yourself in. And then you've got...
But what's interesting is Hinduism is the only true monotheistic faith.
Yeah, Zoroastrian was the first one. It's the very first Zoroastrian.
Oh yeah.
And I would say add to that if you don't have the Zoroastrian.
No, but
Yeah, I haven't.
Because that's the first monotheistic religion.
It's well after Hindu, though, isn't it?
It goes back up to, according to Rudolf Sharp, to 14,000. You know, it goes long way back.
Okay.
First monotheistic religion that actually was, and the Hindu and other religion. I mean, all the religions that believe in one God, the word of duality, what they call it, all of this has a symbol meaning. I think I described it last time.
Is Buddhism a branch of Hinduism, though, isn't it?
Yes, the Buddhists are the Calvinists. They're like the Reform branch of Hinduism. It was supposed to be a Reform branch of Hinduism, except that, you know, now you've got the Stoogie Dalai Lama, which is basically, you still oppress the peasants, i.e. the women, to do all the work, while the guys get to sit up there and drink, you know, yak's milk and read and write and, you know, ring bells and things. And while the peasants slap gold leaf on a red effigy. And the Buddha, the last thing he wanted was a cult of personality religion, so he's turning in his grave. At the Stoogie Dalai Lama, you know, they are the penchant lamas, the celestial feudal kings of feudal Tibet.
I can remember going to a Buddhist centre in Springvale, and they said even their books should not be sold.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
They should be given away. He said a lot of Buddhist stuff. He said,
but realistically, they've got to support themselves.
yeah. But a lot of it, I remember the stuff they just gave it. He said, no, take it. There's no debate about whether you have it or not.
It's very interesting to find out what the Dalai Lama does with all the money that he receives. Because he'll get a sponsor to sponsor him to Australia who pays to bring him here. But then anything that gets donated to the Dalai Lama goes into the Dalai Lama's office. And there was an amazing article in The Age about 20 years ago. His sister's the accountant.
He's
like it's not going into the
It's a good business religion, isn't it?
Good business.
You're going to have a good business here.
That's in the wrong business.
Oh, I like this. This religion is pretty good for me. I enjoy this.
Well, look at the Catholic Church. You've got $40 billion worth of real estate, and
they're not going to let it go, are they?
And for people who, you know, like you have to bury things on consecrated ground. The Vatican is full of mummies and sarcophaguses and bones and...
Don't worry, my family donated just about half all the paintings in St Francis Church in the city. And they never came back, I can assure you.
Okay,
So Hinduism, it's actually, they've only got the one God, which is the black-faced God, and all of the other gods are all representations of the one God.
And they've got Shakti and Shiva, and then and others as well. Yeah, there's.
So Jagannath is the one.
That's the elephant.
No, that's Ganesh. Jagannath is like, they're like the Jainists, where they say that God. So Jagannath has got black eyes and sort of no features, because they're saying that this is the faceless form of God. But of course, all the Parvati and Sarasvati and Shiva and everybody else, it's like that's so that we can relate to the face of God.
Right. Well, I think too, looking at the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church brought out a lot of saints. I think they were trying to supplement the sort of narrow range of archetypes. I mean, even the Virgin Mary was sort of being cast as a military sort of or semi-military role in some during the Middle Ages and so on. And then the Church, sort of squashed it back
just
into
go back to her blue and white robes.
the...
Just stands there and smiles.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
And the other thing too is that Mithraism, which is nearly took over Christianity. So we could have
Yes,
said
well,
Yeah.
rather than
yes,
Christian.
Mithras,
yeah,
yes,
we
I don't
from
cover
Persia as
Mithras,
well.
but yeah, yes, with the bull and
So a lot of Roman soldiers became joined Mithraism.
Mithra.
That's why
Yes.
it's a toss-up between Christianity and
It was, yes, it was
What were Christianity and what?
Mithraism.
Never heard of it.
Mithras.
Mithras, yes.
It's a Persian word.
Same-
Usually
same
it's a
12
female name,
disciples,
but
all that
Mithras
stuff,
was
all
a
of it.
male god in
Okay.
Western.
Similar to Christianity.
Well, it's very much like a Zoroastrian, you know. Same
Zoroastrian, yeah, I've heard of Zoroastrian.
It's sort of archetypally the same. I haven't studied it that much, but the Jungians are into it. You know, the Jungians get into it. The Hindus, the Kundalini, the chakras, the different numbers of chakras. The Tibetans really just had three. One the head, one the chest, the heart, and the other the stomach sort of thing. But one has seven. The popular one has seven, and these chakras control different things. For example, if you're having difficulty communicating, talking, that's the throat chakra. The solar plexus is sort of self-esteem. The heart, you know, if you loss of a loved one or love and so on, compassion. And I mean, this is just a further development on the Greek almost. And then you've got these root chakras and so on. But they could be quite useful, and Jung used one with with a woman who'd actually been brought up in India, and she was having all this sort of emergence of a snake emerging, serpent emerging up through the chakras, and it was all happening, and Jung wrote about that. But they could be useful. All these things can be used as metaphors and to explain, or you know, for different people. I mean, and if a person comes in and they're into all this Kundalini and that's a belief system for them, well, you can great to work with.
There's a bit of a similarity that to EFT too, emotional frequency.
I haven't studied EFT.
No.
But once again, I mean, the whole thing's on.
Some of the points.
Yeah. Okay, so just generally, body, mind, and soul. You've got this division. The immortality of the soul. You also got moral codes, ritual. Now, rites of passage is something that we don't have properly these days. With rites of passage, you know, we don't provide properly. I mean, you have a young girl, woman who sort of starts menstruating. There's no ceremony for it. In our society anyway. I mean, with the church you have birth, deaths, marriages. We probably should have some other ceremonies, and ceremonies are important. That's something we could be doing. I know Martin Peake, he used to, for miscarriages, he used to have a ceremony where a symbolic child's goes and buries the symbolic child and so on. And archetypal symbols, well, I'll talk about that a little. Well, I've talked about them a bit, but I'll just go. Moving on, this is a bit of a hodgepodge, but moving on to Pierre Janet, well, he viewed the mind as a hierarchy of 9 tendencies of increasingly complex organisational levels. He coined the terms dissociation and subconscious. He recognised the splitting of the mind into separate consciousnesses, and he alleged a connection between events in a subject's past life and their present day trauma.
What era was this from?
He was pre Freud and Jung, pre-Freud, Jung and Adler. All of those.
Him up.
Pierre Janet. He didn't write much, and he wrote in French, and it wasn't translated much, so he wasn't very well known like Freud or Jung. But
There's a lot of people copying his
but
stuff.
he was
He was was born in 1859
Wow.
and he died in 1947.
47.
But
Well, he died not that long before Jung. So, but certainly Jung and Freud took a lot from him, and he's sort of one name who is not given enough credit, or not that. Anyway, you've got Sigmund Freud. He had the id, is the completely unconscious, impulsive, childlike portion of the psyche, source of basic impulses and drives, seeks immediate pleasure and gratification. So that's really the id is the subconscious, and he saw, this is the id down here, superego and the ego. This superego was sort of a late addition. It's not a good model, but anyway, you've got the ego that's rational, attempts to reconcile in practical hedonism of the id and the equally impractical moralism of the superego, and then you've got the superego as the moral component of the psyche. That's one model. He may have had other models as well, but one thing with Freud was that Freud saw the subconscious as just this melting pot of sort of lava-like instincts and repressed memories. He did understand repressed memories, and he also identified something remnants which were the archetypes. He sort of saw them, but didn't realise what they were. But he regarded the unconscious, the subconscious, as an inferior, smaller, less important memory or part of the mind. Whereas Jung saw it as the big mind. He saw I'll go on to Jung. He saw the conscious mind. He was a doctor and he did a lot of dissection and so on, but he sort of said, look, we've got this old mind, the reptilian mind as often it's referred to, and you've got this conscious mind as a late addition to it, overlaying it, and that's quite a good. I think that's quite good. If you're talking to a client, it's quite good to say, particularly if you haven't got any toys, you'd say, look, just imagine that's your subconscious, and this is your conscious mind overlaying it. It's quite a easy thing to do. I mean, you've got two hands, you don't even need a pencil and paper. Okay, so you had the conscious mind, then you've got the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. Now, the personal unconscious is your unconscious, that part of the unconscious which is affected by your experiences. The collective unconscious is an unconscious that everyone has.
Did Jung come slightly later than Freud?
No, other way round. Jung was earlier than Freud.
Oh.
So Freud was earlier than Jung. And Jung and Freud met, and then Freud sort of tried to bring Jung in, but Jung wouldn't buy. With Freud, it was he was the boss, and if you didn't agree with him, well, you were pushed out of the circle. And after a while, Jung wrote a book called Symbols of Transformation, which wasn't, which sort of really departed from Freud. Freud was very much into libido, the sexual libido. Things were run by the sexual libido, and Jung said, no, it's the libido is far wider than that. Just moving on to the archetypes. Jung viewed the unconscious as the big mind. We have inherited patterns called archetypes, and these are like riverbeds, if you like. We've got a filter between I'll get back to that in a moment. We've got a filter between the conscious and unconscious minds, which shields the conscious mind from the raw energies of the conscious mind. So what happens if somebody becomes a neurotic? You've got a leaking of subconscious contents, of unmediated contents into the conscious mind. where you have schizophrenia in Jung's term, there's a complete breakdown of the between conscious and unconscious, and you just have unmediated contents just going up into the conscious mind, and the person becomes schizophrenic. And the interesting thing was that Bleuler, who was Jung's boss at the Bergolzi Institute in Switzerland, Bleuler was very good, but Bleuler concentrated more on healing people. Jung was more on writing and developing theories and everything like that. but Jung wrote that Bleuler, and Jung approved. Bleuler was very good. Bleuler said, and Jung agreed, that there was no difference between the mind of a sleeping person and the mind of a schizophrenic, other than that one was awake. But when we go to sleep, the unconscious and conscious minds go.
How do you feel about that?
Well, that's right. But we're disconnected. We're disconnected from the body. But there's another interesting thing on dreams. Neurocybernetician explains dreams, which is interesting. But anyway, which doesn't go against what Freud was writing about dreams, but explains in a cybernetics context. Okay, so we need communication. Yeah, we need communication between the minds. We don't want to have pressure building up in the unconscious, and I've already mentioned breakdown of the barrier. And how do we?
What's that? If barriers weaken.
If it's weakened, you get neurosis. If you get leaking of unmediated contents through, you get a neurosis. And this is where people can come out with things, and you'll say, "Oh, why is he saying that?" Illogical things, or you'll find yourself saying something, and you'll say, "Oh, I shouldn't have really said that," or "Why did I say that?" Or that's that's something leaking out of the unconscious into the neurotic person who's got a fear of a phobia of spiders, and Daddy Longlegs calls it. Obviously, that is a leaking of unmediated stuff leaking through.
Just on that, the idea of the phobia, that's a
Yes.
belief
Yes.
the person's got.
Yes.
It's like schizophrenics have very firm opinions about things, so they're not just being manipulated by bizarre content coming up. They've got firm ideas, and they're very hard to get them to change these irrational ideas.
Yes,
So
but
it's not just like they're victims of a breach. It's like
no.
they'll defend those ideas because to let go of them is too threatening for their
Yes.
foundation. So.
Well, Jung's description is of a bent mirror. In the case of a neurosis, it's like having a bent mirror, but schizophrenia, full-blown schizophrenia, which I confess I'm sort of not familiar with, is like a shattered, where the mirror shatters into pieces.
Schizophrenics will defend their belief system, rational
Yes.
that it is, so vigorously that I get the impression they're really frightened of their mind.
Yeah.
They don't want to give that belief away because they're frightened of their own thoughts, who they might be, really.
Yes.
So, I think that's a little bit too simplistic, actually.
Well, it's simply, no doubt Jung wrote half a volume on it. But also you've got to do, there are differences between schizophrenia as defined in the DSM and Jung, which I'm not saying DSM's wrong, I'm not saying Jung, they're both perhaps defined a bit differently. And Jung's is more simplistic. Yes, I agree. Okay. Now, Jung saw individuation, bringing the conscious and unconscious minds into harmony. He saw that as very important. And you can use poetry, music, art. These communicate with the unconscious, and hypnotism. and to enable the unconscious to communicate in a safe way. And this is where prayer does that, where people go in and they can process things in a state of trance. The unconscious tries to balance the conscious mind, and Adler, I think, was big on this too, as I was reading a couple of days ago. And what I say about this is that you've got to be very careful. The human mind is nobody's fool, as the saying goes. And if you go to some guy who's sitting in the street without a job, with no relatives, living on bread and Coca-Cola or something, and in poor health, and you hypnotise the person, say, "Oh, you're fantastic and life's so good," and it's not going. Or if he plays a computer game, telling him he's Captain Marvellous and he's just saved the universe, sort of stuff all the time, where he hasn't got a job, and it's you get to a stage where everything turns turkey. Just carrying on with Jung pointed out that the human mind isn't just a blank sheet. And I think people like Skinner, for example, the behaviouralists, just think the mind's just blank and you can program it. Well, you can up to a point, but as Jung pointed out, even children have built-in archetypes. Archetypes are patterns. They're archetypal symbols and archetypes, but a lot of people use the word archetypes when they're referring to archetypal symbols. But archetypes are patterns, tendencies which are buried within the actual structure of the brain and which attract symbols from the conscious mind. They're activated by symbols from the conscious mind. The archetypes, one bit of doggerel is that the archetypes lie between instinct and reason. They are, if you like, super instincts. I mean, we have an instinct, if we touch something hot, we take our hand away. But we've got these more developed instincts, such as to follow a leader, instincts to spiritual instincts, to relate to God. We've got the instincts of the mother, and admittedly, up to a point, they are basic instincts, but they're also higher instincts as well, connected with motherhood.
Sorry, just a quick one. The archetypes, especially the tendencies, that fascinates me, because like in animals, they don't eat certain fruit because it's poisonous, and human also the same. So the next offspring or the next generation automatically knows, built in the psyche, not to eat certain things.
Well,
that falls in the category?
That could be more to do with genetics and or the way that our genes, although we have genes from our parents, the way the parents' experiences can alter the way in which those genes are activated. Those genes behave.
So genes is your program, the same as your beliefs and all the archetypes, all what you collect, within you.
Yes, although what people are, what the medical people seem to be saying now is that you can have, you get a set of genes, but if your mother, for example, is extremely anxious, is extremely stressed during the pregnancy, when you are born, you've got the genes, but the genes work a different way. You have more defences and less building. I mean, when you look at it, the body's sort of between, has to make a choice between looking after the body and defence mechanisms, if you like. It takes energy to fight disease, should you be using that energy for building the body or fighting disease. It is tied in probably with sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system and so on.
Yeah.
But the teaching seems to be that this can be handed down from the mother, you know, through.
I'm just not sure whether it's gene or not. You know what I mean? It does get handed down.
Well, they're saying that genes can be tweaked, if you
Yes.
like, or
Yes.
you know,
You were kind of referring to like a drive to do something. Is that what you're saying?
No. Through our interaction with our environment, we find certain things don't work, and we get sick, you know, or eating certain plants. So naturally, when we die, we actually pass it on to our children. So it becomes part of the instinct, part of the natural. They just don't go near the birds, and all the animals do that. And also, what you're saying is true about the psychoneuroimmunology. A mother who having a child could go through certain psychological things that actually the child develop asthma, but mother doesn't have asthma.
yes.
Because
Yes.
the psychoneuroimmunology certain ways of thinking, and mother at that stage.
And then you've got
Yeah.
gut flora, which
Yes.
is another
Yes.
thing.
Anyway,
They-
thank you.
The archetypes, Jung likened the archetypes to riverbeds down which thoughts tend to flow. That's the way he sort of saw it. But, for example, the military, and these archetypes, and the other thing is, of course, as I've already, I think, mentioned, but maybe not made clear, is that the gods are expressions of these archetypes. So Mars, you know, we have the Mars archetype, the Aries, Mars, which is war. And you get a whole lot of people out and start beating a drum, boom, 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 and you'll stimulate the Aries archetype. And in fact, I mean, militaries have all these ways of stimulating archetypal symbols, the badges, the tall hats, the marching left, right, the drill, and all the rest of it, which is, and the regiment, and all this ritual, which is designed to activate and keep that archetype going. Okay, so. Well, here I've already said archetypes are activated by certain symbols or motifs, and these are archetypal symbols, and they activate the subconscious. They have a numinous quality. It's when you look at something and it triggers something within you. That all art, good art, is archetypal, because art takes you to the subconscious, and Jung defined art as something that speaks to the unconscious. So one of the things is life, death and rebirth, and these are all the different life, death, rebirth deities through in various religions. We have Isis and Osiris, Adonis, and of course Jesus, and the deities. The deities representing the mother express themselves slightly differently in different civilizations. But I mean, you've got Isis, Virgin Mary, and that's Ceres, Demeter, Greek Demeter. And the other thing is that there's Marie-Louise von France, who was one of Jung's assistants. Jung sort of had this coterie of sort of young women who used to assist him, and they were known in German as the Jungfrau. But she said all the archetypes are contaminated with one another. It's as though several photographs were printed one over the other. So you will have maybe Aries will be overlaid with Demeter. Demeter was also the goddess of the harvest, but Demeter was also the goddess of children, because children and the harvest are both growth and wealth and so on. So now just going on to Jung's psychological types, he said you've got thinking. Some people are natural thinkers, they're very strong thinkers. These are the people who we would say are in their heads. They're the thinkers. You've got intuition, and they've got a lot of sort of gut intuition. Then there's the feeling people who feel things, and they are the kinesthetics, for example, in NLP. So a lot of these things, they have correspondences. And sensates are more the people who just live day to day. Ad fab, they're both sensates. Where are we going today for lunch? They're the sensates. So what Jung said was that we are vulnerable. Our vulnerable abilities hit us through our inferior functions. He said it's like VAK, the NLP. I mean, you've got visual, auditory, kinesthetic. We're stronger in one, than the other. So a thinking person, their feeling function, they're going to get hit. Something will happen to them, and they won't be able to express those feelings because they're up in their thinking and so on. And this was pinched. This psychological types were pinched by the Myers-Briggs people, Yanks or it. So that they claim to have invented the telephone. So the neuro-linguistic programming, that's therapy oriented. I think that's the first point. The Americans tend to be fix them up. Don't worry too much about how you do it. Just find a formula to fix them up with. But they were good. Linda and Bandler, they didn't seem to work too well with each other. But they had this visual, auditory, kinesthetic, gustatory, and smell, whatever. You have they also look at submodalities, and there's some fantastic submodality stuff where you alter the submodalities. Their model was that we identify things with pain, for example. I don't know whether you've ever done that quick pain relief thing where you alter the submodality of the pain. So you say, well, you've got a pain. What colour is it? It's like a red dagger sticking with that. Okay. Well, what other colour? What colour would be least painful? Oh, well, if it was blue, it wouldn't feel as painful. Okay, change it to blue, and so on. Very effective. If you want a quick fix, quick and dirty fix for somebody with pain, you can do that with very light trance in a couple of minutes. And of course they've got anchors where we associate anchors and reframing where we seem to have pictures in our mind, and if you can take that and sort of put it somewhere else in the mind and reframe it, they can see a whole lot of different things. That's a very, very coarse subjective conscious experiences in terms of traditional senses. I mentioned that. Just one interesting thing is how submodalities sort of come in with the Lucia colour test. The Lucia colour test is scary. It is. You look at it, you do a Lucia test. Have any of you done the Lucia test?
72. That's
it's scary. It's on the internet if you want to do it. Just key in Lucia.
The simple one is quite easy. It's the 7 parts.
Yes.
That's it.
Yep.
What's the idea of it?
It's a different pattern of colours, and if you choose the colours in a particular pattern, it will identify particular tendencies. And it's something like if you choose brown and black together,
I'm
not going to.
So 7 cards, you say choose what appeals to you at that moment without analysing, just go straight yellow.
Okay.
Certain cards, if you have like black, which is really bad,
Yeah.
grey and brown, those really shows a lot of illness and sickness. Combination also could indicate heart attack, if you got yellow and black selected together, etc. Anyway,
It's probably better not to know.
Story of
It's
its own.
probably better not to know, because
But it's very good actually. It
not
gives
to
you
know, just to do it. But
insight
without
very quickly
knowing.
whether somebody is continuing to get a diagnosis or not. If they, especially when they do the cards so dramatically different, you ask them to do twice, and you say, oh my God, this place is it's all over the place, So is hypnosis is appropriate for this particular person because you don't want to stir things up. So from that perspective, it's very quick.
And one thing you can use Lucia for is if you have a client who you really, I don't know what to do with this person, you can always Lucia them. You can always do a Lucia test, and that'll smoke up the stuff, and then you can discuss what the Lucia tests brought up. Just
It's
as a
about the
way
big
of-
one. It's about the big one.
Oh no, this is just with the 7 or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
8,
yeah,
the 8 cards,
yeah,
up
yeah.
with the 8 cards.
Yeah, which is zeros, but yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. Yes, Alfred Adler. I really didn't know that much about Adler. There's a pyramid that he's. I couldn't find it, but he apparently he was, by the look of it, was the first or one of the first people who was talking about psychic compensation leading to mental health difficulties. And he says that parts of the individual's unconscious self ideally work to convert feelings of inferiority to superiority and so on. And this is where Jung talks about the unconscious using complementary daydreams to try and lift a person out of their real world bad circumstances. And up to a point it can work, but then if it's too much, it tears away. There's a breakdown between reality and the inner mind. And he Adler also talked about the inferiority complex, and he says that it's the danger that the individual becoming egocentric. If a person's inferior, gets too inferior, too much of an inferiority complex, then they try and compensate by bossing everyone around and power hungry and aggressive, whatever, the normal stuff. Alpha narcissist. Anton Mesmer, animal magnetism. He saw health as the free flow of the process of life through thousands of channels in our bodies. And the altered state could be affected by projecting a magnetic field with the eyes. He actually saw the eyes, and the ancients saw the eyes as actually casting a force out from the eyes. We see the eyes as receiving information. They saw the eyes, and Mesmer could mesmerise people by looking at it. And there are a lot of amateur and professional mesmerists out there. You've got to be careful somebody's not trying to mesmerise you. If you start feeling uncomfortable, somebody's looking at you too intently, you want to. There are a couple of ways in my book as to how Collingwood teaches the course as to how to avoid being mesmerised, or how to mesmerise other people, for that matter. But in the other way, mesmeric is magnetising the body by passing the hands over the close to not touching, but passing the hands close to the body. And the person who used to do that was Esdale, James Esdale, the British East Indian surgeon. This was before anaesthetic. He performed about 300 operations in India. In the end, he had relays of small Indian boys for up to 36 hours before the operation, just standing, passing their hands over over a person lying down, and then he could operate on them, very painful operations, without them feeling anything. Now Dennis Weir, he's a systems analyst and long-term meditator. He's written a book called The Way of Trance, which I think goes deeper into trance than anybody else. One of the problems, of course, is when you're in trance, you can't think. but anyway, he says trance is about cognitive loops, and cognitive loops are loops that go round and round and round in the mind, and they have a circular structure, but they can be feelings and sensations. And one of the problems, and I'll tie this in with cybernetics in a moment if I have time. And of course he's a systems analyst, so he's been programming computers, and maybe he'd read about some of the cybernetic stuff as well. The other point that he makes, and that is trances can be comprised of multiple trance loops. And I'll talk about this with gambling addiction, that you can have this loop of I've got to win, and I'm going to win, and that can be going around, and I can't tell anybody about this. That's a taboo loop that makes it stronger, and also the sort of feeling of shame, and they can all be cycling around at the same time, which what Weir says is that that's an addiction. With an addiction, you've got these multiple trance loops, and if you destabilise one loop, you've still got two or one other which is still going around, and they get the whole system going back again, working again. They reinstate this multi-loop system.
So what do you call them trance loops? Trance meaning
trance loops. Yeah, well, like a mantra, omni, pardon me, whatever. If you want to put yourself into trance as a meditator, you can just say one thing over and over and over again.
Okay, so it's like these words repeating.
That's just going around and around and around in your memory, and you blank everything else out, and you're in trance.
Yes.
And as Weir says, just make sure you've got a way of getting out, of finding your way back. Now he talks about what happens when you're in trance, and he says you suffer a number of cognitive functions, including short-term memory failure, more general temporary memory loss, disabling of normal association structures. So with our conscious mind, we keep comparing everything. Pink elephant, bzzz, mismatch. No, there's no such thing as a pink elephant. Put a person into trance, there's a pink elephant in the room. Oh, right. What's it doing? It disables those association structures. There's a decrease in associative cohesiveness, so I'm not sure what I'll explain that, but it's associated with disabling association structures. Increased literalism, because you'll take what you're told, because you'll become very literal, because and that fellow every day in every way, the French guy Coué, he pointed that out. People become very literal in trance, and that's one of the good things. You can say to them, you can get up on that stage and talk and won't feel embarrassed or something, and they will take that literally. And disable of critical judgment, and that's good, because if people are, it gives you a fairly free canvas. You've got to be careful you don't go too far with it though. But also it disables things, but it enhances inner involvement, including the production of visions of other realities and so-called delusions and so on, and increased sensitivity to symbols. So if you listen to music and you go into a trance, which music is meant to do, you will get far more out of that music because of your trance state. Your body will become attuned to taking that subconscious content in. And if you go into a church and you've got all these windows with archetypal symbols and stuff, you will become, and you go into a trance, you will become more attuned to opening up to those archetypal symbols.
I've got a question. In trance, is
Yes.
it usual to have loss of energy?
Loss of energy, or
Well,
depends
yeah,
on
like if you're going to take someone down into an alpha state
yes,
and compare with just in normal activity,
Yep.
the energy level would be dropping, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because you're going to get to relax.
with that sort
Yeah,
of with that sort of trance,
Yeah.
but you can have. I think Hayward. Well, who was the lecturer? Hayward.
Yeah, in Hayward.
Ian Hayward,
Yeah.
who I think is brilliant, but
Yeah.
he once described, I think it was him who described trance as being like a cake, that you could sort of cut it. You could sort of cut it straight down, or you could sort of cut it to very different things. I mean, with Esdale's trance, it was cutting off physical sensation, but you can have an African trance drummer, and the trance drummer will put the person, will be dancing until they drop.
Yeah.
So the trance drummer's giving them energy. And the interesting thing is, I asked Martin Peake,
And still be in trance.
and still be in trance.
Yeah.
And the trance drummer, the interesting thing with the trance drummer is, I said to Martin Peake, I said, those trance drummers, do they just beat to a rhythm, or do they watch or are they watching the dancer? And he said, no, they're watching the dancer intensely, and they are feeding back to biofeedback. He didn't use that, but they are matching the dancing with the.
Yeah.
And it's like dancing. I mean, I've never been a good dancer, but a good dancer, you see two dancers, they're just dancing, they're just in sync with each other.
Yeah.
And the Oriental dancer, I was in Cairo watching these Egyptian dancers, and they had the band and they had the dancer, and it was like sex. I mean, they were just, the dancer and the band were just.
Yeah.
And you go to a restaurant, to a Lebanese restaurant or something, and some poor girl comes in and puts on a tape and sort of goes up and wiggles around. It's just, the real thing. The Oriental dance, the belly dance, is all about the dancer and the band.
Yeah.
The band is equally as important as the.
They merge it, they become one.
Yeah.
There's no separation, like a grandfather clock situation. You put a few grandfather clock together in one room, and they all go different ding dongs. In the morning, they all go together. Like synchronous or not together. They all be doing that in the morning, which is really amazing. So it's a bit like that.
Yeah, not that you're watching the band much.
Trance, like positive trance, if I could draw it simply positive and negative trance, I think there's a loss of energy with negative trance compared if there's some positive benefit of the trance. It seems to me it's got to have some.
What's the negative trance?
Well, I think negative emotions or lack of energy.
Right.
You're not going to change behaviour.
Yeah. Depression.
If the energy level is very low.
Well, in trance, you don't have a lot of emotion. That's the thing. The emotion disappears because. So to interrupt you quickly, with any kind of hypnosis or state of trance, that's when the mind is not thinking, you're in trance, aren't you? Because your conscious awareness that you just flourish.
I think we're getting at something different here.
But
I know what you're saying.
So negative emotion trance. So you basically relax when you're in a negative space.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I don't think that's possible.
Hey?
I don't think it's possible.
You don't?
No. If you're that state of deep meditation, relaxation, you can't have a negative trance because it agitates you.
Yeah.
You bring
I'll
your
probably
other
think of a
trance.
different instance. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so well, it may depend on what the cognitive loop is, what the contents of the cognitive loop are. But anyway, this is B.F. Skinner, beloved by American corporations. Brain is a learning mechanism. Skinner is the sort of guy who you say, what a mean-looking bastard, but he's effective, and you've got to give him his due. And he might have been a really nice guy too. Well, he was in Harvard, so he considers free will to be an illusion, and he saw human actions dependent on consequences of previous actions. In other words, the brain's programmable. And he talked about reinforcement. If the consequences to an action are bad, there's a high chance the action will not be repeated. If the consequences are good, the probability of the action being repeated becomes stronger. So that's, and he reinforced it a lot. He researched it a lot with pigeons and rats, and it's important in gambling and computer game addiction.
The China took his own kid too.
Was he?
Oh yeah.
Was he? I didn't know, but yeah.
B.F. Skinner was a total bastard to his own kid.
Yeah, some of
And the
them.
kid was an experiment.
Some of the Americans are really tough on their children, I think. But anyway, in the 1950s and so on, calling you Father Sir, they're supposed to be freedom and no slow, calling you so. But anyway, it's important in the gambling and computer game addiction and the advertising. There's so much positive reinforcement operant conditioning going on. It's the Chinese have got so many of their kids playing video games now. Even Xi Jinping's sort of saying, no, we're cutting down on the hours of play and all the rest of it, because they're just all becoming compulsive computer game players, and they're bringing in loot boxes and everything else. And we've got the same problem, and it's a real problem with our young. It's a new religion it's in place of. But what I think is that he didn't understand the role of trance. He was very good at creating a trance state with pigeons and so on. I don't know how much work he did with people, but you say, well, okay, a person's playing a gaming machine, but why don't they stop? I mean, we should have the intellectual part should say, oh, hang on, no, we've got to stop it. But the thing is, if you're in trance, you're literal. The machine's got these ways of making you think that you should be winning $48,000 a day, which you should, but don't.
This is what I was talking about, going into negative energy.
Well, it's a negative.
I believe that computer gambling and that is about going into negative energy.
Yeah.
It drops something in the energy level, and I don't know how they do it with computer games. I don't know what it is, but the aliveness or something goes out.
Well, it's positive.
It's like watching people with poker machines.
Yeah, it's positive reinforcement operant conditioning. They go into a trance, into a circular trance of staking or doing some action, action, the thrill of the moment where the outcome is determined, and then the result, and then back to the staking or action again. And that's computer games, that's gambling.
Well, you only have to see in poker machine places, particularly with women, the energy they come out of a place like that is just non-existent. Non-existent.
Oh.
And it just, I don't think they'd recognise someone half the time they're coming out. No,
and then they get in their car and drive off, or they forget their child's been out in the car park.
I think I've realised what you were saying, because what I was thinking about trance,
you
state of meditation, yours is a suggestion and also suggestion, you get that, keep suggesting to yourself that loop that goes on, you get focused only on certain things. So I think that was the difference in what you were saying. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. I'm very interested.
It's a term that I misuse using the term,
Yeah. I know you're talking about going to therapy. I clearly got that you can't go into a negative trance.
Yours is again, you get into that repeat, mind keep looping.
But it's still a trance.
Yeah.
It's still a trance. Sure. Yeah.
That was the definition.
Yeah. I know where you're coming into. I agree with that. There's no way of going to negative. Yeah. It's the repetitive something too that's the damage too. Something about the loss of spontaneity forces those gamblers to go with poker machines to go deep into it, because they're doing it many times.
Oh yeah.
They're not doing it once.
It's a loop. It's a repetitive
loop.
loop.
Many loops.
3 seconds, every 3 seconds.
Yeah.
bang, bang, bang.
And it doubles the line.
The psychocybernetic, and just one thing with hypnosis. If you want to dig a hole in the backyard, the old way used to be to use a spade, and you go and you dig with a spade. And when we hypnotise people, that's the way we do it. We sit them down and we use technique to hypnotise them, and we watch them to see they're safe. We monitor them intently. But if you want a hole in your backyard, the other way is to bring in a backhoe and go dig it up with a machine. Now, we can use machines to dig holes. We can use machines to hypnotise people. We can use machines to hypnotise people.
Yes.
Then the Egyptians were doing it 2,000, probably 4,000 years ago with glass plates or a candle.
Yeah.
They used to use candles, sit and watch that candle. Candles flickering away. To take people into trance, or plates, and so on. I mean, and also they had mesmeric passes and all the rest of it. But I mean, a lot of the hypnosis these days is being done by machine, by computer games and by telephones and
Well, even going
gaming machines.
into a supermarket has a hypnotic effect.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
amazing.
even the racing industry now, that's becoming more and more. The racing industry, I'll probably mind to leave it there, and maybe if we could do a bit another day or something if something wants. But even the racing industry now is part computerised because you've got the races, as I understand, I've been told the jockeys have to be on deck to run the race right on time.
Correct.
And they've got to, if they have one race and then they've got another race, they've got to whiz back and jump on the next horse to ride the next horse. And if they hold everything up for 5 minutes, the racing industry, the gambling industry is so, and so you've got this. You've got this real life sort of flesh and blood sort of system going, but at the same time you've got all the totes automated on the phones.
That's confusion too. Because you've got several races going on all over the place at one time, so that causes confusion.
Right. I thought they staged them so you had one in Western Australia and one in Victoria,
they do.
one in
But that can be also a source of
well,
confusing the game.
trying to keep up with, but you've always got something to gamble on, you've always got something to gamble on. And,
anything that takes you out of the present moment is going to destroy your ability to resist being entranced.
Yeah, is going to, it's something that takes you out of the...
Yeah, anything that takes you out of the present moment, it's like it's going to flip you in this. You're focused on that, you're not conscious your own free will or whatever.
Well, you've got this circular, the trance is this circular thing going round and round and round, and anything that disrupts that is, and that's why, just going back to gaming machines, the escape gamblers who are simply gambling for the experience and for the symbols and so on, they get upset when they win because somebody comes up to them and they've got to go and collect their winnings, when they have a big win, and they actually don't like get upset. But
You just went through the Maxwell malts.
yes,
Right?
yes.
I'm a big fan of Maxwell malts too. I find
the cybernetics, the malts sort of was very clever in taking cybernetics, and it is cybernetic, is what he says, but it's a sort of a Bowdlerised version.
He was kind of like went through a popular era there, didn't he? A long while ago now, but
Well, they were into cybernetics. The Americans and British had been studying systems and cybernetics because the Second World War, they really had to organise themselves. And the
What was
British...
the value of him? Like, what was the value of him compared with who went previously? You know, what do you think was his contribution?
Well, the cyberneticists, the interesting thing, I'll just look ahead. The interesting thing with the cyberneticists, if you look at these people, and I can't read their names, but all these are the cybernetics people, the American cybernetics, British, some British as well, and in America, the Americans held two big conferences where all these people came along. But these were all the systems people were psychologists and psychiatrists. They were, I mean, if you look at Ashby was a psychiatrist. Well, he was a brilliant mathematician, and he's still got them books of his maths that people just haven't gone through and need to. You've got an anthropologist, that's Bateson. Heinz von Förster was a biophysicist. This guy was a social scientist, psychologist, sociologist. But you say, okay, you had von Neumann. Well, he was a computer guy. He was a mathematician. Walter Pitts, logician. Leonard Savage can't see what he was. Norbert Wiener was a mathematician. But see, these people, probably most of them, came from psychiatry and psychology. And the reason for that was that when they started developing computers and these systems, the people they found had the best grasp of it were the psychologists who'd been trying to map the brain, brain function. And they said, well, look, you know, we'll take you over and get you involved. And I mean, they mixed with the beauty of this was that you had the mathematicians mixing with the logicians, and so on. You had, I forget, one guy who was there. He worked on nerve gas. He was, but they had these sort of psychologists, sort of chemical people and brain chemistry people and so on, working on all their expert systems. And the same with where's the British mob, if I've got them. No, I can't see them. But the British people were, they actually met at the British people actually met at a mental asylum because that was just where they knew, we can get in here. But it wasn't at a university or mathematics people. They had a society, the British had a society. They wouldn't allow any professors in. Didn't want any because they didn't want professors. But Maltz sort of took one element of that, and perhaps the most important element of this sort of guided missile that the mind can accept a goal and has sensing equipment.
All of these things relates back to a human agent in a complexity and ecology, because human agent is goal-driven, always driven by goal, and is self-regulating. That's the other aspect of it.
Yes.
And all of that is reflected here. See, what happened with cybernetic, I think, correct me, you're more into it than perhaps I am. But what they decided was all these people after the Second World War got together, I think Mexico or something, and all these scientists kind of people, physicists, mathematicians, psychologists, etc., and they said, what does control mechanism in your discipline? Everybody what the definition is. It took him a long time to understand each other. I think it was 6 months or something. Because if you're a chemist and I'm a physicist, I don't understand. I have to understand chemistry to understand what you mean by control. They have to understand the physics. So that was a little bit of a struggle for them to actually got together. But it's very much about that control system. So that's the main driver. And then we got first order, second order cybernetic. Cybernetic, that control system can change itself. That's the second order cybernetic. So it's really fascinating.
I remember reading the book, and I had a real aha moment reading it. there was a transformational experience for me, but I can't remember what the aha was.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant stuff.
Just
Brilliant.
while they're still
That's like
preparing
me,
lunch, if I go
sociology. I
to...
read Merton in sociology. I read it 7 times, one passage. I thought, I finally got it. And I read it the next time, I thought, I've lost it again.
Look, I'll just whiz through, perhaps if we might, if there's still... okay, there was a need for networks, and many of the network science were psychologists. Neural networks resembled the computers, and that photo there, this camera idea to try and alter it, but you had a situation where you actually had modelling of this is the British Air Command here, and they've got a big map of England, and they're pushing they're modelling the real world using physical units with the women pushing the squadron around,
Okay.
and and the telephones coming in. I went to the similar thing in Singapore. They only had they just had 3 airfields but 3 telephone desks and a map of Singapore and so on. Just didn't have any planes. Anyway, the German fighters, they said every time we flew over, we were met by a squadron of Spitfires with 4 fuel tanks, and that was because of those guys. Norbert Weiner, he was the father of cybernetics. He was the fellow at Mexico who
Yes,
put it
yes.
all together, and nobody read his book for 20 years. And then, but the brain and computer have much in common. Parallel processing. He was working with the old valve computers. Parallel processing to check and ensure reliability. In other words, we've got whole lots of neurons going in the same path so if one misfires, we've still got enough going in the right direction. Some brain circuits are dedicated and some are programmable. Obviously the optic nerves are more dedicated and some logic nerves have to be programmable. We've got circulating memory, he saw it, circulating memory and long-term memory. And it's the circulating memory both can suffer functional or organic disorders. Organic is where there's a disease, a physical disease. Functional is where something goes wrong, you can't pick it up on the instruments. Short-term memory, once again, this looping, and this is 4 next loop. I don't know if any of you've done any programming, you've used a 4 next loop. We just go round and round and round until something interrupts it, or it doesn't. Each organisation has an upper limit or size beyond which it won't function. He reckoned the human brain was as big as it could get. He said, probably too big. The longest neuronic chains are likely to are very close to overload. There's excess in the amount of traffic. You simply get overloaded, such as shell shock. Physical removal of channels for the carrying of traffic. That would be in some sort of injury or drugs or something. Or excessive occupation of channels by undesirable systems of circulating memories. Now, this is where I believe a trance can grow and grow and grow and grow, and then it takes over so much of the normal traffic here too. Normal traffic will not have enough space allocated to it.
Right.
And that's what he
Seems right.
clear remedies. And the thing is, if you have a computer, you can clear the program and put in fresh information, and this is psychoanalysis, it's the nearest you can get to it. You can't clear it completely, otherwise the person's dead and you can't get it restarted. With a brain, you can disconnect parts of the circuit with a computer, and you can do that with the brain. He wasn't a big fan of lobotomy after that.
No.
Or you can subject the
Most of
system. Well, apparently you subject the system to electrical surge, and what we do with that with the brain too. So just amusing. But he recognised the need for psychoanalysis to get to deep memory. He didn't know that much about Jung, but he'd heard about Freud and something. But okay, evidence there's a synchronisation. You need synchronisation in the brain. You need a clocking device. And they were talking about this in Mexico, and the mathematicians asked the the psychologist or psychiatrist, is there a clocking mechanism, is there a wave pattern, a clock in the brain? And they said, oh yeah, that's the alpha rhythm, we know all about that. And you've got to have it to free up the system for the next message, so you know how old the message is, you know whether it's new or whether it's old.
Constantly, basically.
But you can send messages by electricity or chemicals, and some messages are given by hormones and so on, which go through the whole body and have a global effect. This is Stafford Beer, he's my hero. The brain has to resemble the environment that it's in, and really that's going back to archetypes, and Jung is really saying the same thing. And he described the sensory system in humans as a 5-level system. But the main thing that comes out of his description is that there's an awful lot of filtering that goes on between up the spinal column. A lot of our thinking is done in the spinal column before we even reach the cerebral cortex. And in fact, if you see this diagram of it, the auditory is going into the lower centres in the spinal column, not the cerebral cortex. And he says it's not even connected. The apparatus has no direct connection to the outside world at all, not even to the body, of which it is the brain. But the sort of major switching goes on within the brain stem as far as the involuntary functions are concerned. And he worked out a viable systems model based on the human organism, because he said that's the most sophisticated. Now, just with dreams, Christopher Evans, a neurocyberneticist, he wrote, during REM sleep, the brain goes offline in order to rewrite its programs on the strength of the day's experience. And he said chopped up images and so on are not inconsistent with Freud's observations. And so we're rewriting our program when we're sleeping to reinforce success and extinguish failure. And then using the process to review the way we do it, which is, keep reading that card, recompiling the compiler, it's the computer people. But it's like, I give it an analogy, it's like a grocery shop. After the day's trading, you've got stuff all over the place. Some shelves are empty, some are full. And you need to go in and clean up, put things in the shelves, put things away, do the accounts, and do all your housekeeping. And dreams are sort of part of that, just where you get glimpses of all this stuff happening. And that's why you've only got to have sleep deprivation for a few days and the person can go gaga. It's a form of torture, according to the head guy, to Marcus Wolf, who was the head of the Stasi. I think one of our ministers, Australian ministers, disagrees. But and this is the governor, negative feedback to maintain homeostasis. I think we're all looking forward to lunch, and don't blame you. But homeostasis, we're designed with negative feedback to bring us back into the stable state. So we've got body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, and we've also got mood things to keep our moods in a stable state too.
And that's a great contribution of the cybernetic positive negative feedback. It's a huge part of it.
And
it's all about the control, how you control things.
This is Maxwell Maltz.
But you see, we've also
Maltz.
I think Maltz was saying that.
Yeah.
But I think it's deeper than Maltz got. So
there's been a lot of different cybernetic type things, has there?
Well, it's a sort of science, but you've got homeostasis, but you've also got dynamic equilibrium, and dynamic equilibrium gives you a bit of range, because you don't want mind body needs to change within limits, and it's sort of programmed for hunting, gathering, eating, drinking, sex, and sleeping. And our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, they keep us they will move us into, when we're running for a tram, we need to maybe elevate our temperature, we need to send more blood to the muscles, we need to do different things as to when we're asleep or when we're sitting down having a meal. And so we move. The point is that addiction is where this negative feedback systems are overridden by something, such as eating sugar overrides the feeling of satiety, if you like.
Yeah.
And similarly, bipolar, or if you look at negative feedback and bipolar, where you've got manic depressive, it's clearly a feedback disorder. Because you should be, normally, your mood should be within a particular range, and something should sort of bring it back. But with bipolar, you've got the system swinging too far from side to side, and it's like a person in a car fishtailing, where the car brakes one way and you overcorrect, and it goes the other way, and you overcorrect again, and the car's
Is there any
fishtailing.
connection between bipolar and like diet, like sugar and things like that? I mean, you're talking about, you know, swinging too far. Sugars and that can swing people's
Yes.
moods. You know, I'm
Yes,
just wondering
yes.
whether
I don't know.
the dietary factor, you don't.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's some relevance with other.
Some, but I think it's deeper than that, though.
It's much different.
Because
Yeah, no, I meant bipolar level,
the
but
and then you've got this neurotransmitter model, and that's something that Weiner wasn't aware of when he was writing in 1956. But you've got these neurotransmitters, the brain chemicals, and this von Steiff, he's the top guy on it. Written a book. You can get it for about $7 on the computer. But he says our neurochemical systems always try to return to their genetically set levels. Well, once again, I mean, it's cybernetics. Treating underlying genetic transmitter deficiencies and imbalances, as well as addressing psychiatric conditions, is paramount in treating drug dependency. Cravings are caused by an imbalance in one or more neurotransmitter systems. And see, this is where craving, the neurotransmitter are interconnected, some systems, but this is worth remembering. Underlying chemical imbalances are what lead to cravings for alcohol and drugs. If you treat the imbalance, you treat the cravings. If you treat the cravings, you treat the addiction. Addiction is cravings. It's the craving that's the addiction. You've got to take away the craving.
yes.
You can lock the grog up in the cupboard or something, but I mean, if you're treating the addiction, you've got to take away the
It
craving.
could be like craving trance.
Yes, well,
It's really a trance, isn't
yeah,
it?
probably,
When
yes.
you think of that,
Yeah.
we distinguish between the two words, but they're very
And-
similar.
Yeah, but this fellow's, it's really worthwhile getting his book. Even if you just read it's very, very well written, and it's just got rules at the end of each chapter, and you see what he says: by adjusting patient's balance of neurotransmitters, we're essentially changing the way the patient's brain processes everything, and this can alleviate things like depression, compulsiveness, and so on. And that's just phrenology, parts therapy, ego state. Well, you probably know ego state. What's individual ego states? Individual ego states may or may not be aware of each other. They may be in conflict, and they may harbour painful memories and not be in touch with the executive. Gordon Emerson, I mean, the model he gave me, which I took away, was of a form of children, or in a form. I mean, if I'm the executive, you're the ego states, and some of you are vocal, and some of you are up the back, beaten up and unable to communicate, trying to communicate with him, not being able to get through, pushing Tony in the back and upsetting him, so he's coming up to me and, you know.
So you had a slide there on parts therapy, didn't you? Is that
Well, parts therapy, ego state therapy is parts therapy. Parts therapy, it depends on how widely you want to. I think parts therapy is a generic term, and ego state is a form of parts therapy. But there are some parts therapists who say, oh, we all have a cleaning the house part, and we all have a driving the car part, and we all have a... And I'm not saying that doesn't work. I mean, in therapy, if it worked, it was right. You know,
Including my wife, I don't have a cooking part.
well, that's
Well,
right.
this is a problem with the Napa territory, you know, Napa territory, you know, because it's very hard to describe what's in a head. You know, we use words, and that's the problem.
That's right. Yes, yeah. And but there are some therapists in America, as far as I can see, where they and I thought I bought a book of, and they sort of had a picture of somebody doing something, and that's one part, a picture of somebody, and that's a part. And obviously, that's not the case. I mean, we weren't born, I mean, the Neanderthals weren't walking around with doing the dishes part or something, but at the same time, it could be very good for therapy, and if it works, it works. It's
it works.
Yeah, and just on that, there's one very quick one, and that's the inner child. I mean, when I was first sort of introduced to the inner child, to me, it was pretty, you know, it was a bit woo-woo and girly and didn't, you know. But at the same time, I think it's probably a very good, for some people, it's a very simple model. And if there's a evaded state, to use ego state therapy, you know, what Gordon Emerson says is you've got to speak to these, the ego state, the evaded ego state thinks it's doing a good job. It's trying to help. It's like a small child that's trying to help mummy do the dishes or something, dropping dishes on the floor. You know, if you say, stop that, don't do that, you're a naughty child, it just drops more dishes on the floor, certainly, right? My second child. And so you've got to say, you know, look, that's a fantastic job you're doing, but look, perhaps we could do something else, you could help mummy by doing something else. And so I think that's a good model. And you've got another thing that stuck with me from Gordon Emerson was protector states. And there's a Jungian analyst who talks about protector states, where parts try and protect the child, protect the evaded state from being exposed in any way. Protect the and so you've got, and what Gordon Emerson says is if you regress somebody and put them into a evaded state, you've got to process it in that session before you bring them back out again. Because he said the danger is if you bring them back out and then try and get back there, there will be other states that are moved in to stop you. And then you've got to try and deal with those states and convince those states to let you get back to that evaded state.
What was that guy Weir's first name?
What's that?
Weir.
Dennis Weir.
Dennis Weir.
Dennis Weir, and the name of the book is, and you can get it on Amazon. Dennis Weir, The Way of Trance. Dennis Weir, The Way of Trance.
And the other thing I want to remember, Lucia, is it L-U-S-C-H-E-R?
L-U-S-C-H-E-R. L-U-S-C-H-E-R.
Lucia color test, you can write, so it says
yes.
Lucia color test.
How do you spell it?
Oh, just color.
Just
Red, blue, green,
Oh,
color.
colour.
yeah.
Colour test, I'm sorry.
It's a very quick. I've been using it for the last 20 years.
Right.
You know, when you most people you can read whether they've got psychosis or not. You know, some people, you know, it's really hard to read. So with that, we give you some indication. It's like anything, just an indication. It's not absolutely.
No.
But it is good to have that in the tool.
And then just one thing with it, there's one thing with Lucia, and that's to remember, it shows you the psychological state at the time of the test. Just to remember that, because it's,
Thanks, Tim.
That was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Really, really good. Thank you.
No, 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 no.